Good morning, guys, and welcome to another Soundcraft session. So, for everyone that's joining today but wasn't part of yesterday's session is basically following on. We're looking at some of the advanced features, or overlooked features, I like to call it. The interesting thing on these consoles is a lot of the features, you won't find them till you kind of initiate the process, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So we're going to dive in. We're obviously with you for 3 hours again. We're coming from Cape Audio College. There's a few students behind me. And a cold and wet Cape Town. But Ian says all weather's good weather. So I'm going to go with that as well. So let's quickly go to our presentation. Great, so these are the things we want to cover today. We're going to look at copy and paste. We looked at that briefly yesterday, but there is quite a few more features that only opens up once the flash drive is inserted. So we're going to look at what they are, and obviously how to utilize, and also then to extract that information from the console and put them on a flash drive if you want to take them with you. Then obviously something that's critical for when you're building mixes is how to copy a mix quickly. Quite a few ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the way that I found simplest, and you can also save your mixes as a preset. When you're obviously in a festival scenario, that is extremely helpful to save it and then use it later on if you've got a similar size band or similar setup on stage. Then, when you're a guest engineer, you often need to work on a console that someone else has already mixed on. And that can cause some issues if the person who's mixed on the console has done weird stuff. So the console allows you to clear buses and channels and mixes very quickly, but we can keep some of the information. Isolations. We touched on this yesterday. So isolation is obviously where we are using a recall safe, as some other consoles will call it. This feature is super powerful. I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on this, explaining how we can use it to streamline our workflows, and also in a live scenario get to a starting point a lot quicker. So we're going to see how we can use that tool. ISO edit is just with regards to editing if you want to edit that metadata or clear it afterwards. Load show files to merge two show files. We're going to look at that. Function keys, actually we did cover it quite intensively yesterday, so not going to spend too much time on that. Then aux VCA mode, very interesting. This allows you to use your VCAs within your auxes. vMix, a virtual mix demo, we're going to look at that. GPIO edit, there's one place that's actually helpful to edit a GPO internally in the console. I'll demonstrate where that is. Tie lines, we can touch on that again. Just a basic network. We're going to look at the network that I've set up here. It's handy actually always just getting the network going, because it does allow you to just pull your iPad out and run onto stage. So I normally have it always kind of set up regardless of whether I think I'm going to need it or not. Mirror nodes is a technology we're using to actually link at the moment our console with the offline editor. We're going to look at scope edit, something you don't often need to do on the console, but I guess there might be once or twice in your career that you're going to have to edit the scope or what gets recalled on a snapshot. Then snapshot preview, how to look at a snapshot without recalling it. And MIDI triggers. I actually need to get a MIDI keyboard for that. We're going to look at direct out gain sharing, and VM2 is bringing the metadata from the receivers onto the console. And we're going to have a quick look at just connecting an iPad. Okay, this is the menu that opens up when we put the flash drive into the console. I put it on here because often guys will say, oh, the crap thing is we can't save our EQ, so we can't save our mixes because it's not available on the console. It's one of the things that's kind of hidden away. I guess not to confuse people in maybe a situation where it's an operator that's doesn't have a lot of experience, or maybe someone who works at a church or a volunteer at church. So some of these stuff are hidden away. That's why we need to look at snapshots today as well, because there as well, there's quite a lot of the features that you won't see unless you know where to look for them. I've just put this up there because on the screen sometimes we can't see the GoPro so nicely. So we'll see if we can maybe demonstrate using the flash drive on the computer. This is the basic file structure when it comes to saving something into a library. It can get quite daunting going through all these libraries to try and find something, but it's a nice little trick. The console actually allows you to filter what libraries we're looking at by actually touching just the touchscreen in a specific way. We'll look at that in a moment. Okay, so let's jump over there. So, same as when you open a show file, there is a lot of the features, like when you want to copy, for instance, all your channel labels onto that Excel file to edit them on your computer or in Excel, you won't actually see that that information until you put the flash drive in. So for instance, there's a little tab here that says export exception files. That is to troubleshoot if you've got an issue with the console. Sometimes support will ask you to send them the exception files. Two of the other ones are to export and import channel labels. Exactly the same thing happens in your copy and paste menu. If you open the libraries, you'll only see, so it'll take a little while just to pick up, you'll only see this window once the flash drive is in, which confuses a lot of people, so I just want to make a point of showing that. So let's quickly look at yesterday, just to recap, copy and paste. The simplest way to do this is to push the copy button, say what you want to copy, and then just paste, touch where you want to paste it. Oops, copy, and I've broken something, like that. That data that you've captured, you can now save in a folder as well. How the folders work is, say I want to save that EQ there, I'll say copy, I'll select it, and then once it's selected, you'll see it's now already taken me into the folder that's the EQ folder. So the touchscreen is actually it's actually filtering the folders, so you don't have to now, when you want to recall it, go and scroll through all those long lists of folders to find it. So you can now give it a name. What was this? Whatever, call it Vox EQ. Just want to show you why it's important. If I say paste, and I just open the library at the bottom here, we're going to look at the offline edits in a moment. It's just a whole bunch of subfolders. So by actually touching an EQ, it takes me into the right folder. Now I can load it. Where was it? It was called vocal EQ. There it is, Vox EQ, load. Let's take a closer look on here. So there's the copy and paste features. Say for instance we've got an EQ here that we like and we want to copy it. So copy that. See, now I'm going to demonstrate this because it's not showing me that page. Yeah. Copy to. There it is. So it's already taken me into the EQ folder. We can now give it a name. And that channel is called David. EQ. There it is. So now if we want to retrieve it, let's go to a channel that doesn't have EQ on. So this channel 49. We're going to say paste. I'm just going to touch that EQ. Oh, it's so difficult doing it on the... Obviously going to have to now be right at the bottom. There it is, David, EQ, load. There it is. Alright. So obviously it's not it's often you need to copy more than one thing. It's not often that you only copy the EQ. If you're mixing a band, it'll probably be the EQ and the compression and some other stuff as well. So when we're copying more than one thing at a time, so let's say copy the compression and the EQ, it's now taken us into a folder called miscellaneous. MISC, it's that one there. I don't know if you guys can see us a bit small on the screen there. So copy those two things, open the library, give it a name. So whatever, this will be David's EQ and comp. And you'll be able to retrieve it in exactly the same way. As soon as you go to paste and you touch more than one thing on the screen, it will take you into that miscellaneous folder. So now there's the console. I'm maybe going to do channel clear while I'm here. I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but you get to a console, and then someone's done this. They've moved this bottom band all the way to the top there, and this is maybe sitting there. Or there's a very whack EQ on here, like that. And you want to keep your input patching, but you want to clear everything else on the channel. So obviously, when it comes to the EQ, you can hold in that little button that says flat all, but it's not going to reset the bands. It's just going to push all the gains and the Qs to their nominal position. So you're still sitting with a problem if you're EQing. This for some reason often happens. I think it happens at festivals where there's like the guy's happy with two of the bands, but one of the bands he's not happy with, and the only thing that's left is the high band, and he wants to EQ the lows. Then he pulls it all the way down, causing a lot of confusion for the next engineer. So we need to be able to clear this data without losing our patch point, right? So that's also a feature that's available on the copy and paste. So it's under the paste tab. We say paste. We're going to open the library. We're going to hold in the select button, like that. Now right at the top, it's giving me two options. You guys are going to have to believe me because I can't show it to you on the offline editor. It's two different places on the console. It's saying a mono channel, or flat a stereo channel. So it's obviously a mono channel, so I'm going to say load. Now everything is cleared on that specific channel, but our patching is still intact the way it was. Okay, it's a very quick way of just clearing. You can do the same thing with your auxes as well. So obviously it's helpful because if you're sending a huge amount of channels to a specific aux, you want to be able to clear everything going there without undoing the patch points. Alright. Next thing over, we want to quickly look at how to copy a mix. So we're going to need some playback for that. Let's get Pro Tools going here. Just want to make sure that monitor 1 is still patched to 17 like we had it yesterday. Let's give it a quick test. So for everyone that's now listening on the stream, we've got a monitor speaker here standing on the floor. You'll hear it on my microphone, and we're going to send a bit of a mix to it. And what we want to do then is to copy this monitor 1 over to, say, monitor 2. So there's 2 different mixes there. This is something we often need to do at festivals. So we're just looking at that level there. So we're going to go to, I'm just going to mute for a second. We're going to go to either on the bigger VIs to all buses. In this case, we're just going to touch on the screen to bring the buses up. And there's quite a few ways of doing this, but when you are copying a mix from one aux to another one, you have to associate it with something. Otherwise, your other option is to go and save it as a mix, right, in the library, like I saved it EQs, and we'll show you how to do that now. But I find the quickest workaround to do it is just to assign it to, for instance, the compression. Often I find my monitors all have the same limiter or compression on it. Sorry? Let's have a look quickly. There we go. So we want to copy from there to there. So a really quick way of doing it is saying copy. There's a little button here that says include send levels. Include send levels. I'm going to tick this. I've associated to my dynamics, and I'll say paste, and there you go. Now both these have exactly the same mix on it. So that's oops. This is monitor 1, and that's monitor 2, carbon copy of each other. So that's the quickest way of doing it. There is other ways. I've found that when I use the select button, the disadvantage of that is it'll change the name of the monitor, because it's copying everything on that channel strip. So it does work. You can say just copy, select at the bottom, and then paste it over. Obviously the extremely important thing here is once you say copy, let's quickly go to the bus. Let's say this little button here. So whether it's on a input channel or whether it's on a bus, you have to actually tell the console that you want to include either that channel send to its auxes. So say if it's a you're mixing a vocal and you've got a really good sound on it and you want to save it for later, you need to decide whether you're only saving the EQ and compression, or you also will include the aux setup or the effect setup. So maybe you want to choose to only take the effects and not the rest. So that needs to be on. and then when you come to your paste, come on, come down. I can't get to the select, but you can just push the select button at the bottom and it will copy it over. I'll try and do it there, but you won't be able to see it. But do you guys understand what it is you need to tick there? So let's quickly look at saving it a mix. So let's say this mix is a really good one, and we want to save it for later. We'll do it in the following manner. Once again, I'm just going to touch the screen where it says mix 1 to 8. So this is now aux 1 to 8. I'm going to say copy. And once again, you don't have this. There's about 3 or 4 different ways you can do it, and 3 different orders that will work. You don't have to first select the compression if you want to associate the compression. You can associate to anything. I just found this is the quickest way of doing it. So I'm going to say I'm going to associate it to the compression there, and copy, include send levels, compression, bring it into the library, give it a name, call it monitor mix number 1. There it is. And we want to maybe bring it onto aux 4, this guy here. Say paste. I'm going to open this library up. Include send levels need to be on once again. Monitor mix 1, and I'm going to say load, and there you can see it's bringing it back. You can select more than one thing if you like. I just find that works really well. You can also save it under miscellaneous if you want to do that. The reason why I found it works well to associate it with the compression is normally you'll have the same compression ratio set up to protect all the monitors at a certain place. And yeah. So now obviously often we need to clear a monitor. So we've been working in a festival scenario and we've been pushing mixes to the monitors, and the monitors tend to the stage just gets louder and louder and louder and louder. As each band comes on, it just gets louder and louder. At some stage you go like, wow, it's getting out of control. We need to maybe just bring it back. Or we set up the stage and the previous band was a 5-piece and now there's a 3-piece on stage. So there's 2 monitors that are just blasting away. And for that specific snapshot, we just want to clear them. When you're only sending a few channels, obviously you can just maybe go and gang them and then pull it down on the rotaries here. But the problem with doing it that way is then you have to always choose the aux that's got the highest value. Otherwise, it'll only go down to, maybe 5 or so dBs if you're choosing something that's only sending softly. So the quick way, once again, is using this feature. You're saying paste. I'm opening up the library and I'm holding in the select button on the aux, like that. And it says flat matrix output. No, not that one. Flat channel output, like that. So everything is now back to normal. But we've retained the naming. It's under this button. Monitor 2 is still there. Okay. Nice feature to bring everything back to 0. Okay, partial isolations. So yesterday we spoke about isolating a channel, right? And try and put this pip in so we don't feel so isolated. You spoke about isolating a channel. So once we switch on isolation on a specific channel, regardless of what's happening in the snapshots, that channel is then just being mixed live. So if you put it louder, softer, or on or off, or do an EQ change, it's basically parked in that position, right? Everyone understands that. What the console allows you to also do is to do partial isolation. A lot of consoles can do this, where you decide you only want to recall safe and EQ, or you only want to recall safe dynamics, everything. But what the VI allows you is also to go into a lot more detail. So you can go, I only want to isolate my high pass and my low pass filter. So I only want to isolate my trim and my gain. So there's 3 modes to this. If we look at the channel strip here, at the moment everything is off. So it's the channel strip looks as it will always, as per normal. If I click it once, it is everything is purple like this, which means it's in full isolation. If there is any other metadata on this channel, partial isolation, it will look like this. So what you're missing at the moment is at the top there's a little dot, which is our input section. So I'm going to add into this partial isolation also the EQ and the dynamics. So I'm holding in the isolate button and I'm only clicking those 2 channels. Let's see if I can demonstrate this on the computer by flipping that specific channel that I've just manipulated. Hopefully there's some metadata on there. So when it's purple like that, it means that it's full isolation. Here you can see a channel that's got partial isolation on it. Just only certain things that are isolated. Let's see if there's another one somewhere. Yeah. Full isolation looks like this. It's like a purple block, which means regardless of what I'm doing on the snapshots, I'm still saving the metadata, but I'm not recalling any of the metadata. When I recall, I ignore it. And partial isolation looks like that. So if I click on the top there, you'll see what is in partial isolation here is my inputs. And then you would ask, why is that important? The reason why it's important is if we're mixing, say we've set up a band and we've got it going, and now someone joins into that session and he is he's playing sax, and we patch him. As soon as we go to any of the other snapshots, it's going to be gone, right? You guys agree? If I say here's this channel, it's going to be the sax. So I'll do some compression, I'll do some EQ, I'll give it an input like that. Where's 16? There. Pull some gain. Great. And now we save it into the snapshot called array. As soon as I go to any of the other snapshots, all that information is gone. So in the scenario where we had a DJ and we wanted to keep the DJ information or the MC the same over all the snapshots, we just do full isolation and the problem is solved, right? But in this scenario we can't, because the monitor, say the saxophone player is playing for 3 different bands and the monitor setup's completely different, or he's using a different saxophone, which means the EQ and the compression needs to be different. He's maybe using an alto sax, which means the gain needs to go all the way up. Now we can decide what information we want to keep and what we want to throw away. So let's say this guy is now also playing on the next band. What we want to keep, so that's the monitor setup like that. It's going to the monitors. We can now go, okay, what from this we want to carry over to the next snapshot. We're going to hold in partial isolation. And I'm going to go, what I want to keep is the EQ, the compression, none of the monitor scenes, and I also want to keep in my patch point, so I'm just touching that, and I want to keep in my gain settings. Okay, update snapshot. So pay attention here. We're going to go to a different snapshot. So I think the fader position is going to change and these scenes are going to change. Okay, so now we can get particular about what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. So for instance, the scenario that I often come across is that I have, say I'm mixing Afrikaans groot, and I've got, say, 20 sets of in-ears. And I'm building specific mixes for specific songs. So they can't stay the same because the elements in the songs are just so different. But I need to get to a starting point, right? I can't each time when the artists get on stage spend an hour to build mixes for all the in-ears. So what I do is I'll put most of the console in isolation. So I'll put the sends in isolation, and I'll put my EQs, compression, my gains, or basically everything except my ons and offs and my fader positions. Then I go through the whole show, and I mix the show as if I'm mixing live. I just make sure for each song that I'm updating my snapshots. Once I got to the end, when I get to the end of my show, the first time or second time, I go and take out all the isolations. Now I can go back to, say for instance, this is the one song, and that is another song. I can have two different mixes going to the in-ears, but I can decide I always want the vocal mic level to stay the same, because that's kind of the comfort, right? When it comes to a vocalist, when they take the in-ears and they put it in and they talk on their mic, they want to hear their vocal nice and loud. They maybe not want to hear the song that's happening on stage so loud, because it's going to maybe it's a way louder song and it's pushing heavy into the in-ears. But they maybe want to hear their own vocal, and they want to hear their own guitar. We can say those are two things we always want to leave the same. So say, let's go to our vocal channel. Where is it? Yeah, this is our vocal channel. We can now say we want this vocal going to monitor 1, isolated, like that. Now everything else will be recalled when I go through my snapshots, but that will stay the same. Do you guys understand how that becomes very helpful? Also, when I've done a lot of programming and there's a change in maybe the guitarist plays his favorite guitar and he gets to the 6th song, and then all of a sudden he breaks a string, or he breaks more than one string, and he can't use the guitar anymore. Now he takes his backup guitar, he plugs it in, and it is 10 dB softer, and the EQ is completely different. But now I've spent the whole day programming each song, so it sounds good. Or it's a theater show where there's a lot happening. So now what we need to do is we need to go to, say it's the electric channel or the acoustic channel. Here it is, electric channel. We can do the EQ change. So we need to take out those mids, and we need to let off on the compression. And because it's softer, the gain needs to go up. So I'm going to pull the trim up because there's no gain on this channel at the moment, like that. And those things now so we're in snapshot number 6 or 7. It needs to stay the same right to the end of the show. We can't isolate everything because then we're messing up all the mixes for the rest of the band. So we're going to hold in, isolate once again. We're going to take our EQ changes. I'm going to hold into the top there to get a breakdown of our input section. I'm going to isolate the trims, and he's send only. So it's electric channel going to monitor 1 is isolated. So now when I go between the snapshots, that specific feature stays the same. So for instance, what we've done here is this channel called David, only monitor 1 is isolated. So that channel going to monitor 1. You can also, as I said, like I do when I'm mixing, building a big show, not going back to a blank page every time a new band comes onto stage, and kind of just, so if you're mixing front of house and you're going from one band to the next, what you can also do is to isolate the whole console, everything, and then mix as you would normally do, save a snapshot for each band, and then afterwards decide what you want to recall and what you don't want to recall. So obviously all the guest EQs on the guest acoustics, definitely you want to recall that. The gains on the guest acoustics. Bass guitars are always up and down. You know, one guy's got an active bass, one guy's got a passive bass. You have to be able to recall all that stuff. But maybe something like the drums, you know. When you mix the first band, the tom sound was kind of nowhere because you didn't have time to work on it. And by the time you got to the sixth band, the toms were sounding nicely. So you want to keep the EQs on the toms, but you want to recall the EQs on the snares because it's a different snare. A scenario that I also like to use is often at a festival, you may be working the other way around and you are doing front of house and you're really quick and you prefer building a new mix for each of the bands, or it's guest engineers mostly. And now what's happened is, because we've sound checked, the first band is not the first band that's going to play, you know, it doesn't always work out that way. But the last band that plays are normally the first band, the last band that sound checks is normally the first band to play. So we do all the sound checks and we do that band and it's great, we leave all their stuff on stage and we recall their scene and the drum kit sounds great because you spend the whole day tweaking. Now, the next band up is the band you sound checked in the middle of the day when the sun was baking the drum kit and the volumes were soft. So on that, those EQs are going to look completely different. You maybe added some highs on the toms or whatever the case might be. So now you've got a problem. You want to keep all your programming, but you only want to carry over the EQs. So in that case, say these were your drum kit for argument's sake. I'll just go and use my gang tool. I'm going to gang the whole drum kit except maybe for the snare. And I'm going to isolate only the EQs. Now I'm carrying all the other programming is being recalled, but I'm carrying the EQ over. You can also now use this feature if you want to transfer data between more than one snapshot, only momentarily. So say you had a whole bunch of snapshots here. I'm just going to create some changes. Right. Sorry. Please warn me if I do that. Okay. So now I've added 4 more snapshots to the show. What I want to do is I want to carry these fader positions only over to the snapshot here, which is called number 4. So a quick way of doing this is I'm going to gang it. I'm going to hold in the isolate button. Then I'm going to hold in on the sign section right at the bottom here where you sign left, right, and so on and so forth. And there's a little button here that says fader, and I'm only going to touch that. So now, when I move between these snapshots, the faders are obviously parked. I'm going to go to cue number 4 and say update. And then I'm going to undo what I've just done. Same process. I've got these channels ganged together. I'm holding in isolate. So now theoretically 4 and 7 should be the same. There's 7 and there's 4. You see when I recall them, they are carbon copies of each other. But if there was any other data on here, like for instance metadata like EQs, and dynamics, and sends, we can still recall that. So those two snapshots are different in the sense that the EQs and the compression are different, but the fader positions are the same. So it's also a nice tool just to carry data over. A nice thing as well is when you do an update on a snapshot, you don't actually have to recall the snapshot. You can just hover over it and say update, which is a really quick way of doing it. Something that happens often is that we get to a point where we've worked on a show file for very long, and I find many times in churches, a show file, someone's built it, and then it's just, they just work on it, or at a club, someone's built a show file, and then every engineer comes and he just mixes on it, and it gets to a point where it's actually getting quite messy. Then you might get in a situation where you go like, I actually want to just clear all this metadata, like all of it, I want to take it all out and start from scratch, but without losing everything else that I've done. When we go into our snapshot menu, setup, there's this section here that also refers to isolations. So we can switch everything on or off. So if we look at the console, if I switch it off now, there's no isolation on the console anymore. But there's another a little button here that says edit. So as soon as I push this button, it brings up, oh wait, I need to first switch it on. The select buttons are blue now. So any channel, regardless of whether it's got full isolation or partial isolation on, basically any metadata pertaining to isolates are now lit up in blue, and we can decide whether we want to clear it. So we can say all this isolation we want to clear, like that. All right. So maybe that can be in a scenario like I explained for the festival. You're kind of happy with where you are, and now you want to recall everything that you've programmed. Great. Then the next thing over here is load ISO with show. So basically what this is saying, when I'm loading a show file, do I want to load the isolations in that show file, or do I want to keep the isolations that I currently have on the console? And you'll ask me, why would we ever want to do that? The reason is two reasons. Say you have built a show file to a certain point, but the show is changing in a way that you're going to need to clear a lot of the channels. So now it's a huge amount of work to actually go and save all the EQs and compression and stuff into libraries and then to recall them again, right? So I want to go like, I've been working on the show file for so long. What I want to keep is I want to keep my drum sound, because it sounds great, and I want to keep maybe the bass and maybe 2 or 3 other elements. But everything else I want to wipe off the console. So it allows you to do that, and we use isolations for that. Let's quickly see how we would do it. So the first thing to do is to obviously clear all the isolation of the console. So I'm going to say edit, and I'm going to just clear all of it. Like so. So now all that metadata is gone. Then we need to decide what it is that we want to transfer into this new show file. So I'm going to say I want to keep the kick and the snare, and I want to keep the overheads and the bass, and I see monitor 1 has still got isolation on. So let's say we're going to keep monitor 1. Maybe the drum effects and the vocal effects. Let's say only that. Now we're going to say load ISO with show. This guy here. It's not going to be yes anymore, it's going to be no. Right. So let's just tick low. I'm going to show files and load a new show file. Default show file. I'm just going to stop Pro Tools because I'm not sure if the master fader is going to be up. I'm going to load the front of house show file, say load. Do you want to save changes? No. So now when we look at this show file, we'll see that everything is back to default. Except on channel B, we still have our drum kit. And if we go to our buses, we should still have monitor A, yeah, and we've got the 2 effects still there. Layer B. So there we go. Those are the ones I isolated. But you'll see all the other ones are blank. So there's a few applications you can get creative with this. It's also helpful when you've built a show file on a VI1, or not actually. So if you build it on a VI1 and you open that show file on a VI 2000, 3000, that's going to be fine, right? It's going to lay it out nicely. But if you go from a bigger console to a smaller console, yeah, then it's going to get interesting. The stuff's maybe going to be in weird places. So what you can do is you can isolate all those channels so it populates it in a nice way, you know, starting at channel 1 and bringing the channels over to the user layers instead of you now going and populating those banks by hand. So it's also a way of transferring data between different consoles. There is another scenario that is quite important to think of, and this is the scenario, and this happens, and it's always a problem. Say I'm the system tech, and I'm setting up the console for someone else, but I don't have anything between this and the PA system, or the monitors, you know. So it's going straight from here to the PA system. Now I've got a nice big PA, I've got matrix feeding, my delays, I set up my 12 wedges and I set up my 12 sets of in-ears. Great, according to the spec, I go through all the riders, it looks all good. Now the engineer comes and he brings his show file. As soon as he loads his show file, all the PA settings are gone. The delays we dialed in onto the delay towers. The delays we've set onto the subs to bring them into phase. All those little tweaking, maybe the EQs and the limiters we put on our auxes to protect our monitors, all gone. So what we want to do is, we want to keep, so go back to the show file we're running today. So load. So what we want to do is, we only want to keep the buses basically, right? So we want to say, rather keep our bus setup, our left and right setup, maybe our center setup, our monitor sends, but bring in all these channels. So once again, we'll make sure everything is cleared and we'll only isolate left and right. And all our monitors, like that. Great. Then we'll take his show file, we'll bring it onto the console, and we'll go to the snapshots section. We'll make sure this is on off. This little guy says no, so load ISO with show. No, we're not loading his ISOs, we're keeping the ones we currently have, and then you'll just load his show, and that's it. So now you've merged these two show files. Okay. Let's move right along. The next thing I had on here was the F key, but I'm not going to go over that again. Everyone knows what that is by now. If you don't, it's this little guy here. If you're watching online, we spoke about this in depth yesterday. You can have a look at yesterday's video if you missed it. It basically just allows us to either use the F key to flip between our two inputs on the channel. So each channel's got two inputs, or to park this channel to lock it so it doesn't flip between layers. Okay, aux VCA mode. This is also one of the things that are very interesting but quite difficult to demonstrate. I'm going to get Pro Tools going again. And I'm going to go to my show file. I see I'm on the wrong one. Okay. So what we're going to do is first just set up a VCA. There should be some setup actually. Let's see. So setting up a VCA, we didn't spend much time on that, but we can look into that now. For the one or two people who don't know what a VCA is, it's basically just a control group. There's no audio coming through here. It just controls the fader position. Very important, when you set up a VCA, the fader needs to be on 0. You don't want to do this or this, because then you are linking your channels to the fader in a very weird position. So fader on 0. We push the setup button here. Select the VCA we want to use. This VCA I'm going to call drums, which is, in this case, I'm only using a kick snare and 2 overheads. And we can give it a name here. Call it drums. Let's quickly, where's the VCA setup? I haven't actually done this in yonks. Talkback. I don't actually know if I can do it on the offline editor. Talkback. Okay, so this is actually one of the things I can't assign here, which is a little bit irritating, so we're going to have to do it on the console. So you just select the channel, the VCA you want to use, in this case VCA 1, and then select the channels you want to assign to that VCA. We can create another one here, so VCA 2 can maybe be the band. So we're just going to assign all the band channels to it. These keyboards. Call it band if we like. I know this is one of the reasons, I don't know if you've noticed, there's only 4 mute groups on the VI, but the reason is once you've built all your VCAs, you don't actually need a lot of mute groups, because obviously they'll act as a mute group as well. So let's just look at what a VCA does. Just going to mute the sax for a second. It's basically controlling the levels of the channels. So there's the drum one, there's the band one. Okay, so pretty straightforward. When you're mixing front of house, obviously you're always setting up VCAs. When you're mixing monitors in post-fade, it makes a lot of sense to have VCAs as well. If the one drum is a lot louder, you can pull the VCA down, right, and bring the drum level the whole drum kit down on all the wedges. Makes a lot of sense. But this do bring a problem. If you are mixing monitors from front of house and your auxes are set to pre-fade, the VCA is only controlling the main mix, right? The VCA is going to do nothing to the monitor mix. So we're going to look at that now. So there's a tool that is included on the VIs, and it's called aux VCA mode, and it works like this. So first we need to initiate it. So we go back to the setup, we select our VCA, so say it's going to be the drum one, and there's a button here that says aux VCA mode. Say yes. I'm going to do the same one for the band VCA, like that. Now we're going to just quickly set up a mix, sending to our aux. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and we're going to listen to the left right, and we're going to play around with the VCA, and we're going to hear how the VCA is manipulating our front of house mix. Then we're going to go into aux VCA mode. You see when I select the VCA and I go back to the aux, now so I'm going into this mix. When I go back to the VCA, it's not blue anymore, it's white. So this means it's controlling the signals with the levels within the aux. So let's have a listen. So this is the VCA for left right. You can see the master's actually changing there. Now we're going to go to, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to go into monitor 1, go back to VCA. So now the VCA is controlling what's happening within the aux. We can see on the screen there, it's a bit small, but the level's changing. It's not controlling everything, because if we assign something in here, like the saxophone for instance, what can I put in here? Room mics. Yeah. So the room mics are staying because they're not part of that VCA. Okay, so and the application is this. This sometimes happens with some artists that you have built a mix for them and they're quite happy with what you're sending them and you spend a lot of time on it, and then we get to a point where we're like ready to show and everyone's excited and the band comes up the first time, and now all of a sudden the whole band's playing louder and the artist is complaining that they can't hear their vocal anymore. So now I've got two options. You can get them to pull their pack back and push the vocal. That often, now you start doing weird things with the gain structure because you're messing with whatever you've been building over time. You know, you've got this beautiful gain structure where the outputs of the console is matched with the inputs of the transmitters on the in-ears. Now you're starting to mess around with that stuff. So what I do is I build a VCA, say VCA 8. I say setup, I select VCA 8 and I call it all. I normally say Xbox. Okay. One of the options when it comes to building VCAs is whether you want to select all the channels into that VCA or none of the channels if you want to clear the VCA, or if you want to make all the faders back to 0 or all on and off. I'm going to use the option that says all. So now the whole console is controlled by that VCA. But I'm just going to go back to the vocal. Yeah, and I'm going to deselect it, that one vocal. So that VCA is now controlling everything except the vocal. I'm going to deselect, aux VCA mode actually needs to be on. So now if we say this is the mix 4 for instance, is the one for the lead vocal, and there's a mix like that. Some, none of those. Lead vocal, some effects, and keyboards. That gets saved. Oh, my tapping. Array in your monitor, great. And he's happy with that. We can play something quickly. There's the mix going there, perfect. Maybe make it a bit louder. And he's like, can you please bring the whole band down but leave my vocal where it is? Very simple. We're in this mix already. We're going back to VCAs and we just do that. So now you've made the whole band softer by 5 dBs, but the vocal has stayed in the same place. So I always encourage people to build the VCAs and rather not use them than to not build the VCAs and then in the middle of the show having to add them in. So it makes sense. Nice tool, eh? Aux VCA mode. Okay. GPIO edit. This is something that we don't often deal with in live sound. I think more guys who do like radio installations will use a GPIO to switch on a rag light, or to use a fader start. You know, if you want to lift up the fader, then maybe the sting starts playing and stuff like that. I guess that's stuff you'll use GPIOs for. In live sound, I don't think I've ever really needed to use it. The console do use GPIOs for certain functions, and I showed you yesterday on the tap. And the only place I've ever needed to manipulate a GPIO is where the engineer, he had 2 or 3 different tap delays on a VI 7000. The reason was that he was feeding a electric guitar into the delays, and I think the one side maybe was half notes and the one side were quarters for a specific song that has to be like that. And he said the problem that he had is when he taps it like this. So let's say effects, he had something like this. So there's a studio delay there, and then on the effects unit right next to it, maybe a 2-tap. You see how they're not together? And he said the problem that he had is whenever he taps it, that happens. It's like slightly off, like, you know, because you're tapping it once or twice or 3 times to get a nice average, and then the average is slightly off, and now the guitars are like doing weird things. And if it sits against a track, you know, if there's the track to it and the track's quite tight, then all of a sudden it's not nice anymore, even if it's very slight. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to use one tap button to trigger both of those effects units. And this is how we do it. So once you've done this, when you go back to GPIOs, you'll actually see that the console is using them, and I don't know if we'll be able to see this on the offline editor. Let's quickly check. We can. So at the top there, the blue is the input, and the red is the output, and you can see how they're changing. So that it's actually saying the function key LED. So it's the response from the effects unit is what we're seeing there. And what we want to do is we want to change the tab. So tab 2 and tab 3, the parameters we want the same. So this is something I'm going to have to do on the console. So it's these two we're going to make the same. We're going to make that one number 2 as well. Like that, but I don't think this is going to manipulate. The offline editor is set up as a slave, so I don't think it's going to manipulate the console. I'm going to have to do it on the console. So now what's happened is, when I give an input to function key to, it's triggering both of the effects units. So it's 107 and 107. If I tap it, it's 135 and 135. Alright, so now you can obviously load two completely different effects units, and then on the returns you can get just funky on how you return them. So maybe patch the one on your channel as a right and the other one as a left, and now you get that interesting effect that he was using in the studio and he wanted to replicate. That is the only time I've ever used GPIOs on the VIs. I mean, if you guys think of another application, let me know. Okay, Aux VCA mode, vMix. So for vMix, I've set up a different show file and a different Pro Tools session. While I am loading this, I'm maybe just going to explain what it is. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Dugan auto mixing. So you're basically giving the system a whole bunch of inputs, normally speech, that's kind of what it's good with, and then on the output it just gives you a mix. It's auto mixing, especially for vocals. So this is kind of what it is, and the first thing that people then ask me is it a gate or a compressor? And it's not either of those. And it's the only way to really explain what it does is to demonstrate it. So I'm just going to open a vMix session on Pro Tools, and all it is just people talking. So it's a talk show, a British talk show, that people talk, and you have the other contestants need to guess whether they're telling the truth or lying. So it's actually quite funny. Show file, I'm going to load my vMix. Great, so I've set up some channels here. There's a few hosts in the show, David, Lee, Rob, and then there's 4 guests, and there's also an ambient channel. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to just see how to set it up, set up a vMix group. So I'm going to go somewhere on the console where it's cleared. If you want to apply the vMix to a range of channels, what we'll do is we'll select gang, we'll select a range. At the bottom here, where we assign things to left and right, so the output section, there's a little tab that says vMix, and you just dial it to decide to what vMix group you want to assign it to. Go, yeah. There it is. So this console's got 2. On the bigger consoles, the 5000, 7000 has got 4 vMix groups, and each of them can take 16 channels. It's under effects, vMix. There's the one I've already built. It's vMix group 1. And you can see David, Lee, Rob, guest 1, 2, 3, and 4 is assigned to it. vMix group 2, there's still nothing assigned to it. And at the top right, it'll say how many spaces, processing channels are still free. In this case, it's 16. So let's quickly assign these guys to 2. So there you can see vMix group 2 has got those channels in, which is 49 to 56, which is on layer D. As soon as you assign them, you'll see there's a little blue line. On the first group, it's just a green line. On this and on this one, it's blue. It just indicates to what vMix group it's assigned to. There's a few settings that you can change, but I normally find that I don't really actually have to change anything. You can calibrate it. The calibration acts basically exactly the same as the trim here. I guess this is there in a situation where you're receiving the signal from a main console, maybe a front of house console, in a broadcast scenario. And for some reason you don't want to pull the gain up, you want to keep the gain structure it is going into the compressor, but you would like to just match it here. You can calibrate it up and down. And then there's one thing that's quite important, it's called weighting. Obviously when you mix a show, so say you're in a corporate scenario and these are your panelists and they all have headset mics on, what will happen is you'll have your faders like this. Normally what happens, you'll get one person on the panel and then people will join, and then you get to a point where you have 4 or 5 or 6 channels open, and now you start getting feedback because the headset mic is sensitive, it's a little condenser mic, and maybe the way the PA setup is now not allowing you to add anything more. But they're still adding more people to the panel, so now you're stuck with this scenario. This is where things don't feed, down here. But this is where it's nice and loud on the PA. So you have to pay attention to what's happening in the conversation. You constantly need to ride the guy talking. So these 2 guys are talking to each other, and then it's these 2 guys, and the moderator is chipping in every now and then, and he's saying something, so he asks his question, and then we go to this guy. This is fine for a few minutes, but if you're doing this the whole day, it can get quite taxing, paying attention to what's happening on the panel the whole time. So this is exactly what vMix is doing for us. It's automatically mixing, opening this fader virtually. So it's not the actual fader that moves up and down, it's a little virtual fader. This little fader there that opens and closes, and it happens extremely fast. And the reason why it's not a gate is because it's actually listening out for speech. This is why this feature doesn't work great on other stuff. I mean, I've used it on backing vocals, it's okay. And I've used it on brass, it seems to do the job. But brass is so loud, you might as well just use a gate, I guess, if you want to go that route. This literally opens the fader when someone's talking and then brings it down, closes it. So the main benefit is if you're using a mic like the one I'm using here, and this one is omnidirectional, you get a huge amount of room. And once the fader is open like that, there's quite a lot of room in there. So if you want to record the signal to a camera for a backup, you're going to have massive room, and feedback becomes a problem. So we're eliminating those 2 things by using vMix. So let's quickly have a listen to what it sounds like.
I liked it.
So where did the alcohol come into it, though?
Well, you can't just have porridge by itself and banana. It's very dry. You have to have something to drink with it.
Are you seriously in a half-pint glass or in a pint glass that's half full?
It's half a pint.
Have you got it on draft in the kitchen?
No, I don't do that. I buy lager like other people do in cans. I don't gulp it down.
So when you're using the vMix, you can still use the faders to override it, and your EQs and dynamics, everything is still working 100% fine. all it's doing is, and what you want to listen out to now is actually don't listen to the vocal, listen to the ambient sitting around, sitting around the speech. So I'm going to go toggle it on and off. We should be able to see the faders also moving. So that's off. You see the little green faders? Not quite sure what that is. That's very weird. All right.
Started. I liked it.
So where did the alcohol come into it, though?
Well, you can't just have porridge by itself and banana. It's very dry. You have to have something to drink with it.
Are you
Yeah.
seriously in a half pint glass or in a pint glass
No,
that's
no,
half full?
no. It's half a pound.
Have you got it on draft in the kitchen?
No, I don't do that. I buy lager like other people do in cans. I don't gulp it down.
So that's
So
off.
just
like a
enjoy
lady.
it. I read The Guardian.
The
when I'm-
potassium...
Read the Guardian with your half alive.
That's
Your
fine.
banana on the other hand.
Exactly.
Forget the paper.
So another thing that it also allows you to do, like for instance that guy that's laughing so loud, or if there's someone that's talking loud all the time, you can now use your weighting to make him less important in the conversation. So I think it was this guy here. There's two ways to remedy that. Obviously you can put a compressor on. The second thing to do is you can, on the weighting, there, you can bring it down. It's probably easier to see it here. So the fader position is basically showing whether it's open or closed.
To have something to drink with it.
Are you
Yeah.
seriously in a half pint glass or in a pint glass
No,
that's
no, no.
half full?
It's half a pound.
Have you got it on draft in the kitchen?
No, I don't do that. I buy lager like other people do in cans. I don't gulp it down. I just
like a
enjoy
lady.
it. I read The Guardian.
The
when I'm-
potassium...
Read the Guardian with your half alive.
Your banana on the other hand.
Exactly.
So afterwards, I'll give you my headphones and you guys can have a listen to it without the room. And it's actually quite a big difference to when the V mix is on, the room is just completely gone. And when it's off, obviously the room's bleeding through the whole time because the faders are open. Okay. Network. I want to quickly jump back to the show file that I had. So I just wanted to mention something about setting up the network. It should be quite straightforward, but what I've realized with the VIs is they don't like managed switches. So the simpler the switch, the better they work. You set everything to DHCP, and they just graft perfectly fine. So I've actually got a quick drawing of what I've done with the network. Let's quickly go there. This is kind of roughly what I've done. This actually was my previous setup. So what you want to look at is the green. I've got a little hub, network hub, and I've taken a network cable from the computer, the PC here on my right hand side. It's running virtual VI, which is basically the GUI that's on the computer. And I've got a network cable going in there, and then also from the wireless mic and from the console in there as well. So it's very, very simple. What I find most easiest is just to set up, just to use unmanaged DHCP switch and to switch your computer and your consoles to DHCP. So where do we see this on the console? It's under settings, and network is the bottom tab there, and then where we switch it on is address right at the top. Let's take a closer look at that. Sorry, network, address. So the first step would be obviously just to connect the cables up. You want to look on the front of your switch, your network switch, that you're seeing activity on all of them. And then you just toggle. A very good indication of whether your network is healthy is whether you can just switch it on or where you struggle to toggle it on and off. So you want to switch it on. The difference on the computer is, and I'm going to have to switch it off to show you this, but when you switch on the HiQNet on the computer, the first time you do it, it's actually asking you what network you want to use, because obviously the computer, most computers has got at least a Wi-Fi and one network port. Some computers, I guess, can have more than one. See, for some reason this has gone back to manual, but at this case it doesn't really matter at the moment. Then in the console we do exactly the same thing. We want to just switch it on and see that it's connected. Then when we come back to our iPad, there's an app that allows us to control the console as well. And this is yesterday when I said it's important to label your channels, this is one of the reasons why. Because when you're using the app and you're looking at the channel labeling, it's always going to show you the short label here. So as a rule of thumb, whenever I label the console, I'll just label the long label and short label together. So same thing on the iPad, we obviously want to connect to the network. So in this case, I've connected to my AudioSense network there. Go to the application. Oh, and now it doesn't see it. There we go. So you just pull down on this, and it will refresh the page, and it will show the console there. There's a little number in front of the console, and that refers to the HiQNet port. It's this number here. So that's the HiQNet address for the computer, and the console's one is 100. Any Harman device that you connect into the network needs to have its own address. Okay, so it'll need an IP like this, obviously, and a subnet mask. But very important, this thing here. It does sometimes happen. I think there's a default, and I can't remember what it was. But if you've got 2 or 3 new consoles, they'll all be on the same HiQNet address. So then you just need to go and change them. Otherwise, they'll clash. So what we're seeing here, that 100 refers to the HiQNet address of the specific console. As soon as we click on it, it'll open it up, and now we can go to, in the background you'll see the fader moving. The app's quite straightforward to use. You scroll along like this to get to different channels. You can also jump to a specific place on the console by using the meters, that little tab there, and then say I want to go to channel 17 to 24. If you want to send something to send, there's a little tab there that says sends, and you choose your aux. So say I'm going to say aux 1, and now all these faders are pushing into aux 1. You'll actually be able to see it on the console on the back there. If you want to go back to left and right, click there. The settings of each channel is under this tab here. And then we've got EQ, dynamics, and there's a tab called miscellaneous as well, which is filters and so on. Faders on the right hand side there. So I mean, very easy, straightforward little tool to use, but extremely helpful when you're in a mix scenario and you need to go to stage to help people with monitors, or you don't have a monitor engineer. It often happens that we are mixing and then the artist say they can't hear something, but you're looking at the console and you can see that you're sending it. Then you need to go troubleshoot. So as a troubleshoot tool, this is extremely helpful. The fact that you can actually stand in front of that specific monitor and feed it in, or it can be something simple like 2 mixes being swapped around and the artist is asking for it and you're like, well, I'm giving it to you, why are you not getting it? So you actually can go on stage and go just quickly sort it out. It also builds a lot of confidence, I find, in the artist when you're on stage and they get to meet you and you're actually there working on the monitors with them. So that's the primary tool. We even use it at the big festivals when we have more than one engineer, or I've got a technician that's not doing anything to help on stage. If we've got a lot of monitors on stage, so we've got 12 or 14 mixers, and we've got a sound check that's only a few minutes long. Let's say we only have 15 minutes to sound check that band. It's a lot of work to build 8 in-ear mixers and get 12 monitor mixers sounding good in 15 minutes. It's very tight. So then to maybe get one of the other guys to help you walk around stage and at least get the basics in, you know, get the right vocals in. It helps you as well because then when you're standing behind the console, you can see, okay, well, that fader's up. So that is definitely something that specific musician wants in. Great. So that's network-wise kind of what I want to say. Just going to quickly see, go to the next slide here. I think this is the next thing on my notes. Let me just open my notes. Oh, it's actually not. So the next thing following on when it comes to the network is linking more than one console together. So there's a whole bunch of applications here. As I said yesterday, probably the most common one is when the client is asking you for a backup console. So say it's a very important or show and they want a main console and the backup console. So what you'll do in that scenario is out of the stage track, the one cable will come into the one console, the other cable, fiber cable, will come into the other console. You'll build a show file on console number 1, take the show file, copy it to console number 2, and then you'll introduce both consoles to the same network. Once you've done that, you'll come here to network, you'll switch on your network settings, and then come to mirroring, and now you need to decide which of these 2 consoles will be the master and which one will be the slave. This is important because, like for instance, earlier when I wanted to assign, what was it? I wanted to assign the vMix. It won't carry on to the other console. The one still stays the master up to the point where you break that connection. So in this case, the computer is the slave, and this thing is normally off. You'll decide whether it's master or slave. The meter source, whether it's a local meter source or the remote one. In this case, I made it, come on, I don't know why it doesn't want to toggle now. I made it remote because I want to see the metering on the console. Because it's a laptop, it's got, obviously, if I put it on local, it's going to be no metering whatsoever because it's not connected to any hardware. And there's a few options here that you need to decide on. Monitor in solo, oscillator, user layer sign, and patching. If you're using that second console only to expand on faders, so say we need to mix a show and we want to use a second VI1000 just to have more faders in front of us. we maybe don't want to do some of these settings. Maybe have the monitor and solar off, because if you're in a broadcast scenario and there's a second engineer helping you there, you don't want him to be able to override your solos. So you can decide what you want on and off. Then you'll go to the other console. So this is going to be the main, my VI1000. Same thing, menu, system. Address needs, obviously we want to see that our high-Q net is on. Mirroring. And then this guy is going to be on master. And the metering is also going to be local. That's the only thing that's important there. And you just switch it on. Once you switch it on, you get that little tab at the top there saying connected. What happens now is that the console is pulling, the slave console is pulling all the data from the master console by itself. Very important to know, you can still run different show files on the two different consoles. You need to decide at some stage whether the slave console, if we're going to just then save the show file there, what are we doing with the snapshots? Or if we're using it as a fader wing, that doesn't obviously matter, we can just save the show file and leave it like that. If we're running the console as a backup system, what I would suggest is to create the show, like on the master console. The show's done, and we save it, and then at that point when there's no more changes and all the snapshots have been programmed, I'll load the show onto a flash drive and then transfer it to the slave console. The reason is, if for some reason something goes wrong here, we want to be able to just continue and recall snapshots on the second console, because it's not going to transfer the snapshot data. I mean, if you look at the snapshot list here, it's quite long, right? If you come here, it's a completely different story. So at the moment, it's actually it's set up as more as a wing setup or a support for the main console, instead of being a complete backup system. So obviously when you transfer show file from the first console to the second one, you'll have all the snapshots there, so if there's small changes you can just say update. But I would suggest making sure that you at least have all the snapshots here, so if console number 1 goes down, you can just walk over and do the switch on the PA management system and you're back to where you need to be. So that's mirror mode. You can set up mirror mode between any of the Soundcraft consoles, or obviously between your computer and any of the consoles. You can also, I've done this once, and I did a show where the console was in front of us and we didn't have a monitor console at all. The front of us engineer was mixing monitors, but I was there, so I was willing to help. And I had the iPad on stage, but I also had my computer just on stage as well, as a second backup, to have more than one option with a hard cable connected to it. So that's another scenario where you can use mirroring to make your life easier. Okay, snapshots. Great, we're already there. I wanted to just go through the snapshot section a little bit more in depth. Obviously, it's very simple to create a snapshot. We just hit store, and then we can give it a name. That's primarily 90% of the time what we need to do. On the console, these buttons are on the console. It allows us to toggle up and down, and to also recall. We can also make a change to a snapshot and then hit the update button. The update button will always refers to the snapshot you are hovering over. This is quite important, and not the snapshot that you've currently recalled. So If I say update now, it's updating that snapshot called MX and not band. So I need to make sure that I'm there. Right. Then another thing that's important, obviously you want to be able to delete a snapshot. So you hover to the one that you want to delete, say delete. Are you sure you want to delete a snapshot? Yes. You can also duplicate snapshots. Oftentimes, at a festival, you've created a whole bunch of snapshots, and there's two bands that are very similar. So I normally, just to be careful, I would not recall it. I'll just say duplicate and start working there instead of going into that snapshot and maybe breaking something. As soon as you duplicate it, there's a little D in front. So now we can go there, recall it, and start mixing away and just bring the changes into that snapshot we need. Another thing that also happens quite a lot is that we will do all our sound checks, and obviously these will all have names. Let's say whatever, a band 5, or maybe it's a scene in a theatre piece. And we're rehearsing, but we don't do it sequentially, right? So they're in different orders, so we need to be able to move them around. So how do we do that? We hover over the one that we want to move, and we click the move button, scroll to the position where we want it, and then say drop. This does cause an interesting problem on the left hand side now, because now the cue list doesn't make sense anymore. So if you're mixing a corporate, you'll probably have a running order, and on the left hand side you'll have item numbers from 1 to 100, walk up, and then introduction, and then a VT, and whatever the case might be. So you'll program according to that, and then at the end you'll obviously have the rehearsal. You now move all these snapshots into their correct places. Right, but now what's happening is the cue list here doesn't make sense anymore. So a little trick that I've learned is I take my start scene, which is normally my mute scene, because there's nothing programmed on there except patching. I'll move it all the way to the bottom. Then here is a little tool that says renumber cue list. I'll say yes. It's asking me whether I want to renumber. I'll say yes. And now the cue numbers make a lot more sense, and they should correspond with what's happening on your cue sheet. And we can just go back to start. At this stage I normally just duplicate it, and I move that one right to the top. So now I've got a mute scene on the top and the bottom of my show, and my cue list is exactly the same as it is on the piece of paper. You can also multi-select arrange if you want to delete a whole bunch of snapshots at once. So what am I doing? Say we want to select all of those like that. We can delete them. Or you can say select all, select none. Also on the screen, it obviously allows you to make a new queue. So you can make a new queue there, or you can hit the store button here. Same as the previous and last buttons here. You also get it there, so it just skips to the next one without asking you any questions about recording. So it's like a fire button, you hit it and it just goes. Or you can hover over the one that you want. I normally do this, and then hit the recall button. There is actually I can't actually remember what the undo button is. I think it's if we want to take data out of that specific queue. Let's just double check. Update snapshots. Yes. So if for some reason you have made a mistake, so you were mixing and you were hovering over the wrong snapshot. So you're working here and you did this. That very crazy faded position there. And you wanted to update this snapshot or that one. You've got that the wrong one. You say update. Yes. And you realize you've updated the wrong snapshot. You can say undo and it will take that last action out again. As far as I know, you can only undo once. I've never really used that feature, but it's there to be used if you need it. Then when it comes to some of the more advanced features, they're all hidden away. So all your time code and GPIO triggers and MIDI triggers, those things, you won't see them. Same with your scope, it's hidden away like that. You need to open it. So how do we see it? First of all, if we click on the first little tab there, it opens time code settings for that specific snapshot. The application here is when you're using this console in a install scenario. So say this console's at a museum and there's some system in the museum that allows people to select audio and then it plays out on a specific timeline. So it's something the system triggers playback and then the timeline plays out. And part of that programming on the timeline was that the speaker goes on here and then it goes off the source and then it pushes the audio here and then it goes off or whatever the case might be. So maybe as the graphics move along, the audio moves along as well. Now we program all of that, but something needs to trigger it. So the console allows you to trigger timecode at a specific place. It's MIDI timecode, and you ingest it via the MIDI, and then you can say this snapshot needs to be triggered at a specific place, whatever. 3 hours, there, like that. So whenever the timecode hits this place, that snapshot will be recalled. That's one of the ways of doing it. You can also put a MIDI note on your timeline and go out of a sound card into the console. I've done it. That works really easy as well. You can disable a queue. If you're in a theater scenario and you just want to disable a queue for that instance or for that specific show, we may be skipping that scene over or the queue over, and you want to use the next button on the console. So when you're on show, the queues are quite tight on each other and you just want to skip over it and you just want to ignore that one queue. You'll do it there. Sorry. Actually, just want to check something before I go along. On this note, you can bypass all the cues as well, and this has happened once to me where I was mixing on a console and the console was receiving MIDI cues from another console, and what was happening is I'm trying to do a program change and the guy's pushing play on the timeline the whole time, and then my console is skipping there. So in that moment I just wanted to switch off all the cues, so you can do it at the top here. If you select there, now none of these cues will trigger anymore. It also allows you to do it for the snapshots there. This is obviously includes any data that's in here, like timecode data. This includes the console, any MIDI settings and any GPIO settings. It's good to be aware of this because it can happen that someone leans over the console and touches the screen at the top there, and then your cues don't work. It does happen. People, they want to say something to you and they're leaning over the console and they touch the cue list. So it's good to know. Okay, yeah, that's the first tab. The second tab is where we do our fade times. Very simply, this fades everything on the console. So just quickly demonstrate that again. So I'm just going to say store. I'm going to put a fade time in. So I'm just putting a fade time on both those last two snapshots. And now instead of the console snapping to that place, it's doing a nice fade across, and this counts for everything that's on the console. Also fades, EQs, and dynamic settings, and also to any sends that are going to any auxes. You can make a note if you want to. I don't know. Remember to switch on mic 7, and then it comes up on the little screen there. And the only other thing that's here is the UAD enable or recall. So if you have a UAD server, which I unfortunately don't have, and it's introduced to the console, whatever changes we've done on the plugin server will be saved into the snapshot, and there'll be a little blue icon here saying UAD. Okay, MIDI. So this is now one of the things that I wanted to demonstrate, and I'm hoping Ian's help here is got a MIDI keyboard here. It's just connected to MIDI in. Doesn't seem like it's picking up. So the console allows you to use a MIDI trigger to recall a snapshot. And this is quite handy when, as I said yesterday, when we're linking more than one console. Often we if we're doing sub mixes in front of us, or once I had to link two VR1s, because the one was doing vocals, the one was doing band, and there was a third console from another manufacturer that was recalling all the presets for the personal monitoring systems. And we wanted to program all of them and have them run together, so if there's only one engineer on site, the band can still rehearse and everyone can still hear the right stuff at the right moment. So what we did is, for the opening of the show, when there's quick changes, we'll program a MIDI note on the Pro Tools timeline, and then that will be captured onto the first console, and then the first console is just daisy chained through. I later on just put a MIDI splitter in, so it's quicker. But what works well is you just go into the first console, out of the first into the second, and out of the second into the third, and you just make sure that the right scene is being recalled by the right MIDI note. I do have a MIDI keyboard here, but it's not something we didn't test this morning. But the simplest way to do this, if you're linking more than one Soundcraft console, we'll do it in the following manner. Say this was the master. We'll switch it on, and we'll use a predefined parameter called go to queue. And I normally like to keep my queue number and my device ID and queue number the same, just to not confuse myself. The VR1000's only got one MIDI out. Some of the bigger consoles have two. So in this scenario, I would say that is queue number 3, event number 3. Let's go to queue. I'll just make everything 3. ID 3 and queue number, what does it want to go? to, I don't know why it doesn't want to go to 5 now. So my queue numbers are all weird. Let's quickly try and fix that. So that looks better. Now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Aye. Getting lost here. There we go. I previously deleted some of the snapshots and those queues weren't there anymore, so obviously you can't recall a queue that's not there anymore. So I just renumbered my queue listing. Important thing now is obviously that your queue list on both consoles are the same, or at least the queues you want to recall need to be the same. What you'll do then is you'll take the MIDI out from this console to the next console, and you'll on exactly the same queue, you'll switch it on, and you'll say learn, and then you can either fire it there, and we'll pick it up, or you can recall the snapshot, and that will cause the fire to happen. I'm going to see if I can just double back onto the console and create a trigger like that. So I'm taking my MIDI cable back into the console. It's not being kind to me, obviously. So what it normally is, it will just pick it up. You can also manually do it. Go to queue, and it will be 1. So that's how you link two consoles together. What might happen is that you're working with a manufacturer where you don't know in what range and what MIDI notes they used. So then what I would do is I'll create the queue on that console and then recall it and just say learn on the VI, and it will just populate wherever it is. Like I know, for instance, the one console I worked with, they were using controller, and it was 16, like that. You can obviously go read the manual and find it. So this is what it looked like on that specific console. And how I knew this is I just created the snapshot and the last one say 70 or 77, and I triggered them, and I could see the range, and then I knew what to trigger. So between the VIs, I just had go to queue, and then between the last VI and that console, I just used on the output, I used the controller, that one there. It's not a shame I can't demonstrate it. I had an issue with the MIDI keyboard the other day as well. It was a bit finicky with it. Alright, so that's quite a nifty little tool. And then obviously you can do exactly the same thing with GPIOs. I'm thinking maybe in a radio studio you want to use a GPIO to trigger a fader position. Or to maybe mute the console, or whatever the case might be. I don't know if you guys have noticed, when I was working yesterday, because of the GoPro, I had to dim the screen, on the main page. So obviously if the venue is really dark, then a bright screen like this can actually not be so nice to work on. You know, as your eyes adjust, you want it to look to the dark stage and this really bright screen in front of you. So you can dim it there. Every now and then you are in a scenario where the director will ask you for a complete blackout. And you might be in a situation where even though you've put the screens as dim as possible, you still can't, it's still not dark enough. You know, the screens are just spilling too much into the room. This happened to me once at a very, very small theater. Unfortunately, I didn't have VI, so I had to just put a cloth over the console for the opening scene. But what we can do here is to put a blackout onto a specific scene, to black out all the screens completely, and only to keep the backlight on very slightly. So what I normally do, just for safety, I like to duplicate that specific scene, just so that I've got a version of the scene where it's dark and a version of the scene where it's just normal. And then I'll put the blackout in there. I'm going to move over to the console now. So let's say it's that Q7. I'm going to say duplicate and go to the last one. So if we're there, as soon as we move over, it's blacked out. But the console's still working. Everything is working as per usual.
When you go abroad, do you hunt down bananas?
It's just
Yes, it's not
all the
difficult.
little lights off.
Stay in the right place. It's
Um,
not difficult to acquire lager anywhere in the world.
All hotels do have.
On this feature, you'll see when you go to the scene with the blackout, this F6 is still lit up. That is to get yourself out of that scene, just to bypass that feature. Yeah, I normally, if I use this, I'll just duplicate the scene. You can see the next button is still lit up, so you can still go back and forth. I just like being able to get out of that scene without changing any of the audio. Having an option where the screen is blacked out or not. It's also a very nice way to prank your friends. If you want to give them a heart attack, you can put a blackout scene in there. Right, let's go back. Yeah. I just want to see that I've covered everything. Yeah. All right. Then yesterday we spoke a little bit about the differences between using an isolation and using editing the scope within a snapshot. And remember what we said is when we put isolation on a channel, even if it's just a EQ, that isolation on that EQ applies to every single snapshot. So obviously you can work the other way around as well, where you've got two snapshots here. On this snapshot, whenever we recall this snapshot, we want to recall the EQs, so it's on. But when we recall this snapshot, we don't. This is not a tool I've used a lot, but there is an application where you would need it. And if you're mixing theater and you've got a show file that's beautiful, you've worked on this thing for weeks, you want to be in a situation where you can run the show and do updates, but if there's a substitute in that show, not destroy all your snapshots. Does it make sense? So say the show's running, and then halfway through the run, the electric guitarist gets sick, and now there's a stand-in for him for a week. But as the show goes along, I still want to have the ability to do little updates. Now, if I can't switch off the scope, or if I run the isolation, every time I save, I'm basically destroying what I used to have. So either I must save the guitar settings and the tone settings in the EQ library and then one night sit and program them all back, or I can decide not to recall them at all. So I'll go to the first snapshot and I'll only do the change there on that EQ and then undo the EQ for the rest of them. Does that make sense? Or go to that channel, for instance. Where's all the channels? There is a channel setting. I need to think now where it is. You can see I don't use scopes often. I think it's when we process it, and to just bypass that specific channel. So the scenario also that I've thought of, and I guess the reason I don't have good scenarios because I've never really needed to do it because the isolation on the console is so good. But a scenario that I thought of is if I want to make a program change very quickly. So say my whole show is programmed and on channel 1 I want to make that change there, or for instance I want to do that change there. The console does allow you to do snapshot editing. So oh, there we go, there's the channels. So you can deselect a channel like that as well. So how does this work? So now you want to apply a change to your scope over a bunch of snapshots or all the snapshots. I'm going to try and demonstrate it as best I can. As I say, I never really use this. I would normally just use my isolates. But let's try and see if we can make that change. So I want these two faders to stay on 0, and let's say they need to be off for some odd reason throughout all my snapshots. How do we do that? There's a little editor here at the bottom. You say start. Then the first thing we need to do is to select the scope. So what is it that we want to change? And in this case it is our fader positions, yeah. And what channel it is, it's channel 1, right? So we're going to say none. Apply it to channel 1 only. Select the cues. In this case I'm just going to say select all and press apply. The reason I don't like to do this is if at this stage you've got it the wrong way around. I'm not exactly 100% sure if I've got it right now because I hardly ever use it, and I've messed up a whole show file like this before because I was working on it and then accidentally I switched off a one of the channels, but I didn't realize I was doing it. I don't know how it happened, and then for the rest of the show every single time I recalled the snapshot, that channel was off. But anyway, let's give it a go. Let's say, are you sure you want to override the selected snapshot? You say yes. So it's going to go through them. And theoretically, now if we go through our snapshots, that's the first one. If you pay attention to the bottom here, it's applied those faders being up and off on all the channels. So it's another way of bringing a global change to all your snapshots without using isolations. I don't know why, but it's there to use. Maybe if someone knows of a good scenario that they've used where the isolations would have not been an option, I guess. Actually, I would love to know why. How I would have done it, I would have said ISO and select it at the bottom here and just say fader and on. That does exactly the same. Oh, and on this channel as well, alright? Both of them. So that does exactly the same than what I've just done on the snapshot editing. And I guess everyone will agree that's a way, it's a way easier, and it's nice because you've got a visual that you've made the change. Because if you look at those channels, what channel is that? 1 and 2. Oh, sorry, I've messed it up now. So unfortunately I can't hold in the button and push the screen, so it's something I'm going to have to do on the offline editor, on the console itself. But that's basically snapshots, and everything you need to know about snapshots. Not much more to it. There is one other feature that I thought I'll demonstrate because it can be handy to some in some scenarios. For this, we need to go back to the array scene. I'm just opening the right Pro Tools quickly. So sometimes what happens is that you are busy mixing, say, a festival, or it might even be a corporate, and you realize that if you recall the next snapshot, you're going to have pandemonium on stage or in the venue because there was a DJ programmed into the snapshot, and you can see coming into the console, the guys left the decks playing. So now you're in trouble because the band's climbing on stage, and as soon as you recall that snapshot, you're not going to be able to pull those faders down quick enough. So obviously snapshot's going to recall, the fader's going to go up, and it's going to be blasting in the venue or on the monitors. So the workaround there would be to Pro Tools, close here, use the preview function. It's this little guy here, and essentially what it does is it allows you to go into a snapshot and have a look at what's going on there without recalling it in that instance. It's going to help if I can demonstrate this with some music. Okay, so say this was the scenario here, and we're looking at our meter bridge, and we can see the DJ's coming in super hot, and if we go to the next snapshot, we know it's going to be blasting. So let's say it is this snapshot here, and where's the DJ? Show how the DJ channel. These faders are open. It's coming in hot. So what we want to do is we want to apply that change without recalling it in that instance. So I'm going to keep the audio passing so you can see that I'm not manipulating the snapshot that I'm in. So we're going to say preview mode. As soon as I select it, you'll see there's a bar on the screen here. Now I can go here. And there's the faders that are up. I can pull them down. Say update. And then when I deselect the preview, we're back where we were. So you can go and apply those changes as you need to. Yeah, I guess something you need every now and then, not every day, but it's just good to know that you do have it. Or maybe the scenario is the other way around. Maybe you need to recall the band, and you realize the podium mics are busy open at the moment, and now you can't go into your band scene because if you do, then the podium mics are going to be closed, right? So now you can go into the band scene, open the podium mics to the same place where they are now, and then this allows you then to go seamlessly out of this snapshot into the next one. Great. So I want to make sure that I'm staying on track here. Okay, so I said we were going to look at the gain tracking on the console. This is one of the few things that you'll need to go into the settings page. So you go menu, settings, and it's this. It says dogs, direct out gain sharing. And there's two modes to it, channel and direct out. So first thing, I'm going to use the channel setting. For this to work, obviously there needs to be a I'm going to have to demonstrate this on the console because we don't have hardware connected to this. So let me see if I do it the other way around. Kick. Can't be kick. So I need a physical input. So let's say that Neo channel might actually work. Try to figure out why this is not working now. It's going to create a load, a blank show file. So I'm patching a physical input to the channel. Okay. So what I've done is, for this to work, there needs to be something obviously patched into the gains. So in this case, it's mic number 1. And what's happening is, when I bring the gain down, it's compensating for the trim. So the application here is these channels are connected to the stage rack, right? And they're coming into the console, and then we're doing our processing, and then at some stage maybe it's going out here via insert to a plugging server. And when I do a gain change here, I don't want the gain to be any gain change going into my EQ, into my dynamics, and then essentially into the insert, because that's going to affect how that plugin works. You guys agree? So what we'll do is we'll pull the gains to a certain point where we're happy with them, and then at that stage we'll apply this setting here, which is the direct out gain sharing, and it needs to be on channel for that, for the specific explanation. Which means if I am taking the main output into the front of house console, and the aux out is going into a broadcast console, and the broadcast engineer is saying, listen, you need to go down, you're too close to red, and we're going to get into trouble, I would like some more headroom. So that's fine, I can just bring the gain down, but now I'm messing with my whole gain structure. So before I do that gain change, I'll then go and switch on a setting, come back here, and I can pull the gain down. So the recording is still happy, no problems, or broadcast, whoever the case might be. But it's applied that change there to so that the gain structure on that channel stays exactly the same. That's the one scenario. The other scenario is where we're using direct outs to feed a recording, which is happens often, right? We use direct outs to record into multi-track machines and whatever the case might be. So we're monitoring our recording, and we're monitoring our console, and then in the show we realize we don't have enough gain on the kick to move the PA, whatever the case might be. So we need to gain the kick up, or the drummer's playing really softly, or it's a new band and the drummer's playing softly. Now we need to adjust gains. But we want whatever's going to the multi-track to stay the same and not go into a clip. We're going to then change it to direct out. what I'm going to try and do now is to grab the gain on the console. So now when I gain it up on the console, it's trimming it down on the direct out. So this is a way that you can do gain sharing between two consoles as well, I guess, if you want to, is to use the direct outs into your second console via Dante or Maddie. I guess in a install scenario it will work pretty well. I don't think for live it's the best idea. All right. Next thing is looking at the metadata coming into the console. So oftentimes we're running at a show a whole bunch of wireless mics. So at the moment I've got a Shure QLX here. This is the one I'm talking on. And if it's a bigger show, you'll probably have a system tech or a RF tech looking after those mics, or one of the technicians. So they'll set them up and they'll scan the frequency range and deploy the mics on those frequencies, and it's their problem and you don't have to worry about it. But if you, once again, install scenario, often you're the only technician. So one of the things that Soundcraft has done is it's made it possible for you to bring the data that's on the screen here in the front onto a specific channel. So you set up your network on your microphones as you would always do. I've got an example here. So this is Soundcraft Vi 6. This is actually one of the examples I pulled out of their manual. And it's going into a network switch. And there's a VI1 monitor console at the bottom. And they've used a little hub, and the microphones they're using are AKGs. Very simple, it's just a normal network setup. Then, and I'm hoping we're going to be able to see it on the screen. Let's just see. I doubt it, but no. Then if we go to network settings and wireless mics, maybe it's because I didn't switch this on. This console, this computer's in a different range, so I don't think it's going to pick up. If we go back here, network, wireless mics, you'll see the microphone has come up there. If you go onto your offline editor and you change the name, it will actually say the name of that specific mic. So if you call it RX1 or you give it a name, say John, you'll be able to see it there. Now what you need to do is you need to assign this information, this metadata coming in here to a specific channel. And how you do that is you allocate this mic to a input. So I'm going to use mic 1 going onto channel 1, and I'm just going to assign it there. As soon as I select it, you see there is some additional information that comes onto screen now, and I can see my mic battery is flat. See if we can see it. Yeah. Oh, I was hoping we'd be able to see it on channel 1. Unfortunately, we can't see it, but the data on is there. 1, 2. Yep, and you can see when I talk. Yep, it's coming up. The battery is red, which means it's not going to last much longer. We can also see in the menu down here, it's using antenna A, and the frequency is 795.4. There's also the option on the gains, whether you want to look at the gain that's on the console or the gain that's on the receiver. And if you flip it to receiver, when you do a gain change here, you're actually changing the gain on the actual receiver. Up and down. Cool, thank you. Great, so obviously I've only got the one here, but you'll be able to populate all of them through. See if we can quickly fix this network issue. Very annoying network issue. I'd love to show you what it looks like on a nice big screen. For some reason this network has gone to the address of the computer and not conform to the address of the rest of the system. 0, 1. Okay. 16, that looks good. Just gonna give it a second just to pick up, but theoretically we should be able to see it then on there. Yep, let me quickly change batteries. Alright, I'm back. Let me just make sure that I'm still on track here. So that was actually one of the last things that I wanted to demonstrate. It's now a bummer that it doesn't want to show on the console, because I want to show a nice big view of what's happening on screen here. Let's try and move this to DHCP. This computer have been giving me some issues. Alright. Is there any questions on Facebook? I don't know if they're negative. Do you guys have any questions in the room at the moment? Anything that I've skipped over maybe? That's everything that I needed to go through for this morning session. I see for some reason we are way early, which hardly ever happens, half an hour. So I'm gonna then stop the session online. Thank you for everyone that was watching on the Facebook stream, or that's going to watch the Facebook stream later on. If you have any questions about any of the features that we've gone through, please put them in the comments section and then I'll have a look at them later. And yeah, have a lovely day. Cheers guys, bye.